everybody? Adam Larson, aka the Jazz Ginger, coming back at you this week with some thought-provoking content. Let's ask yourself this question. Have you ever stood up to take an improvised solo and thought, oh my god, I'm so overwhelmed with all the options I could play, I'll just play whatever I want instead, that'll sound better? Yeah, how did that sound? Probably not so great. Or maybe you stood up to take a solo and you said, oh my gosh, I have no idea what to play, I'm so underwhelmed and underprepared for this moment, I'll just play whatever I want instead. How did that sound? Also probably not so great. More importantly, how did it feel? Yeah, it didn't feel so hot either. So, let's talk about some ways that we can improve that. How do we feel confident when we improvise? Well, let's start with sound. Why is sound important? Sound is important because it's quite literally the first thing that anybody hears, including yourself. If your sound is together, that instills confidence that the notes you're about to play are going to sound pleasant. If your sound doesn't sound together, the first thing that's going to happen is that your confidence is going to erode. And once your confidence erodes, nothing can be done. Nothing matters. So sound is super, super important. So if you're not practicing sound, I would highly recommend doing that each day. Let's talk about some of the nuts and bolts devices that we can use as improvisers to make simple, melodic, and engaging solo statements. Let's start with a conversation about chord tones. So we should probably define what chord tones are. Well, chord tones are literally the tones that make up a chord. And in jazz, most of the time, we have 4 basic chord tones, 1, 3, 5, and 7. So I'm going to demonstrate a way to practice through those different chord tones as I go through the progression on a B-flat blues. I'm going to play 1, 3, 5, 7 on each chord, and it sounds like this. So as you listen through that, it sounds very much like an exercise, because it is. And I would encourage you guys, if you can find a recording in the history of jazz where somebody takes an entire solo exclusively on chord tones that are in that order for the entire time, I'll happily give you everything I've ever written and recorded for free, because I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist. That's not to say you can't make really engaging statements with just chord tones. They're just typically not played in that fashion, straight up and down. So let's talk about how we can take those chord tones and work with them as units. I like to think about chord tones being broken down into 2 units. A unit that is the 3rd and the 7th, and a unit that is the 1 and the 5. Now, typically in jazz education, there are 2 chord tones that get a lot of love. Which chord tones are those, I wonder? Right, 3rd and 7. Now, if you're anything like me, when I was told that at a young age, I just said, cool beans, 3rd and 7. Got it, awesome, good to know. I never stopped to ask why those are important. 3rd and 7th are really important because they define the quality of the chord. But which ones have been around longer, 3 and 7 or 1 and 5? That's right, 1 and 5. In fact, hundreds of years longer. And they do this fancy word in theory called tonicization, which means they help your ear hear the key, 5 to 1. So chances are really good that you've heard this kind of root movement, 5 to 1, in popular music, and you may not even be aware of it. But being aware of it as you solo will help you keep your place in the form and give you good notes to play that sound pleasant. So let's test this out. I'm going to play now only 1 and 5 over the B-flat blues progression and see how it sounds. So as you listen back to that, you might be thinking a couple things. Wow, that sounds like you used a lot more than just 2 notes. I can guarantee that I didn't. All I did was use those 2 notes. Now let's talk about why it may have sounded like I used more than 2 notes. What are the things that I'm doing to make those 2 notes sound interesting or compelling? Well, I'm using range, right? On the saxophone, I have the advantage of having an octave key. So if you're a brass player, you might be rolling your eyes a little bit. On the saxophone, I have a lot of different places I can play just those 2 notes for each chord. So that gives me the ability to have contrast and where I'm placing those notes on my instrument. Also, I was doing interesting things with articulation and how I was shaping the sound. Where do all these things come from? Shaping sound, articulation, creative uses of range? That's right. Listening. Listening. So if you've ever been told by a well-intended educator that listening is something you have to do every single day, start believing it. It's really important. These ideas don't just come off the top of my head. They're informed by hours and hours and hours of listening to this music. If you feel comfortable with 1 and 5, let's try to do 3 and 7. That sounds pretty interesting as well. And hopefully you can still hear the blues progression as I go through that with those two notes. However, it's a little bit harder to hear, potentially because we have no root now in what we're playing. So I would encourage you again to start with just simple soloing with just the root and the 5, and then if you feel comfortable, try the same thing with just the 3rd and the 7th. If you're on the more advanced end of the spectrum with your improvisation, you might already be thinking, well, okay, well, what's next? I have a really good handle of this. Try doing the following, which is to use all 4 at the same time, but in ways that don't sound like straight up and down arpeggios. That might sound like this. That's about it for today's video. In next week's video, I'll take a deeper dive into some devices beyond chord tones that will make us feel confident when we take improvised solos. I'm really having a great time creating content for this channel, and I hope you dig it. If you do, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and share this with your friends, and happy practicing, everyone.